This is section 16 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The guests. St. Andrew's Society Dinner, London, November 29th, 1873. Read by John Greenman. I feel singularly at home in this Scottish society. I have spent so much time in Scotland that everything connected with Scotland is familiar to me. Last summer I spent 5 weeks in that magnificent city of Edinburgh, resting. I needed rest, and I did rest. I did not know anybody. I did not take any letters of introduction at all. I simply rested and enjoyed myself. From my experience with the Scotch, everything belonging to them is familiar, the language, the peculiarities of expression, even the technical things that are national, are simply household words with me. I remember when in Edinburgh I was nearly always taken for a Scotchman. Oh, yes, I had my clothes, some part-colored tartan, and rather enjoyed being taken for a Scotchman. I stuck a big feather in my cap, too, and the people would follow me for miles. They thought I was a Highlander, and some of the best judges in Scotland said they had never seen a Highland costume like mine. What's more, one of those judges fined me for wearing it, out of mere envy, I suppose. But any man may have a noble, good time in Scotland if they only think he's a native. For breakfast you may have oatmeal poultice. I beg pardon, I mean porridge. Then for dinner you have the fine Scotch game, the blackcock, the spatchcock, the woodcock, the moorcock. I have simply to return my acknowledgments and to apologize for not being able to make a speech. But give me fair play, and certainly I can make a speech that will astonish anybody, and nobody more than myself. My present position is a national one, if I may be regarded as representing the United States of America. On that side of the Atlantic there are 40 million of people. They may be respectable, and I will say, in conclusion, that I do hope a brother American will soon cease to be simply a phrase meaning, but will by and by become a reality, when Great Britain and the citizens of America will be brethren indeed. End of The Guests, read by John Greenman. This is section 17 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Introducing the Reverend Charles Kingsley, Essex Institute, Salem, Massachusetts, circa February 14th, 1874. Read by John Greenman. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to introduce Mr. Charles Kingsley, the lecturer of the evening, and I take occasion to observe that when I wrote the book called Innocents Abroad, I thought it was a volume which would bring me at once into intimate relation with the clergy. But I could bring evidence to show that from that day to this is the first time that I have ever been called upon to perform this pleasant office of vouching for a clergyman and give him a good unbiased start before an audience. Now that my opportunity has come at last, I am appointed to introduce a clergyman who needs no introduction to America, and although I haven't been requested by the committee to endorse him, I volunteer that because I think It is a graceful thing to do, and it is all the more graceful from being so unnecessary. But the most unnecessary thing I could do in introducing the Reverend Charles Kingsley would be to sound his praises to you, who have read his books and know his high merits as well as I possibly can. So I waive all that, and simply say that in welcoming him cordially to this land of ours, I believe that I utter a sentiment which would go nigh to surprising him or possibly to deafen him, if I could concentrate in my voice the utterance of all those in America who feel that sentiment. And I am glad to say that this kindly feeling toward Mr. Kingsley is not wasted, for his heart is with America, and when he is in his own home the latch spring hangs on the outside of the door for us. I know this from personal experience. Perhaps that is why it has not been considered unfitting that I should perform this office in which I am now engaged. Now, for a year, for more than a year, I have been enjoying the hearty hospitality of English friends in England, and this is a hospitality which is growing wider and freer every day toward our countrymen. I was treated so well there, so undeservedly well, that I should always be glad of an opportunity to extend to Englishmen the good offices of our people, and I do hope that the good feeling, the growing good feeling, between the old mother country and her strong, aspiring child will continue to extend until it shall exist over the whole great area of both nations. I have the honor to introduce to you the Reverend Charles Kingsley. End of Introducing the Reverend Charles Kingsley, read by John Greenman. This is section 18 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dinner Speech, Massachusetts Press Association, Boston, February 17, 1874. Read by John Greenman. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know that I have the faculty inborn in Americans which Mr. Kingsley has called your attention to, but if I haven't it, I shall not take this occasion to confess it. And not having ever been to school, I have not the faculty of declamation which the President speaks of, and as I only knew 2 hours ago that I was to be here, I have naturally come with no speech, because I never knew a man who could deliver an impromptu speech with only 2 hours to get it up in. But the presence here of Mr. Kingsley, Canon Kingsley (his title Canon has always been a puzzle to me), but his presence here suggests to me an episode of my own, recently, and as under the old regime, I don't know what the old regime is, but it is something that used to exist before. When called upon, you had the privilege of telling an anecdote or singing a song. Never having sung a song, at least having never succeeded in singing a song, I am still perfectly willing to try now, but I am afraid it would be disagreeable to the audience, so I will tell an anecdote. When I was crossing over from England the other day, there was a youth on board, about 16 years old, whose nationality I will not expose, who occupied his entire time eating, when there was anything to eat, and thinking about the next meal between times. I don't say he put his mind to it, for he didn't seem to have any mind. When sent out from the table he used to go up into the smoking cabin and lie around there asking foolish questions. This boy never asked a question during the whole voyage that indicated the presence of knowledge of any kind whatever, and he came to be a perfect nuisance to everybody, and we tried all possible ways of crushing him and make him stop asking these questions. But as I said, Canon Kingsley reminds me of one occasion when I came up into the smoking-room in very ill humor, not in the humor a man ought to be in to listen patiently to silly questions. The question the boy began with was aggravating, because everybody knows that the first place a man goes to when he reaches London is Westminster Abbey, and the next place is Shakespeare's burial ground, and that this boy should ask me, deliberately and with such innocence about him as he had, if, when I was in London, I went to Westminster Abbey. That is enough to make a man frantic. I said, "What was it you said? When you were in London, were you at Westminster Abbey?" "No," I said, "I stopped at Langham's Hotel." "But," he said, "it is not a hotel." "Well," I said, "what is it?" "Why, it is a church." I said, "A minute ago you said it was an abbey." "Well," he said, "it is an abbey and a church, too." I said, "I don't know about that. You appear to be getting confused in your statements. How can it be an abbey and a church at the same time?" There was another gentleman sitting there, whose nationality I will not mention, who said it was perfectly true that an abbey and the church were the same thing. I said I was much obliged to him, and asked him, "Where is this place, this church? Is it in London?" "Oh, yes," he says, "of course it is in London. You know where the Parliament buildings are?" "Is it part of the Parliament?" "No," said he. "What has Parliament got to do with it?" I asked. "It has not got anything to do with it. The Abbey is close by it." Said I, "Do you know how far Westminster Abbey is from Langham's Hotel, where I lived?" He said, "I suppose you know it is some distance." Said I, "Of course it is some distance." "5 or 6 miles," said he. "But," said I, "didn't you suppose I knew better than to get up early in the morning and travel 4 or 5 miles to church, when there were plenty of churches all around?" He said, "I didn't expect you to go to church." Said I, "What did you expect me to do?" He said, "Look at the monuments and things. Monuments of everybody that has done anything and is dead. Their bodies are buried there." I said, "Do you mean to say that they actually take up the planks and bury men under the floor?" He said there were no planks there. I said, "Do they bury them right under the seats?" He said, "Of course they do." Said I, "Is that healthy?" "Well," he said, "I don't know whether it was healthy or not. They do it in all the churches." I said it was a curious custom. I had never heard of anything like it. If any of my friends were in Westminster Abbey, I should not want people sitting around on their tombstones. He said, "You didn't hear the cannon, then?" "I don't remember," said I. "I am a man of peace, and I don't know anything about artillery, anyway." By this time the boy had not yet waked up, but the rest of the company which had gathered around had, and so we stopped the fun. As there is no moral to the anecdote, I won't attempt to put any to it. But, as I said, in the absence of having a speech to make to you, I thought I would simply tell an anecdote in honor of Canon Kingsley. End of dinner speech. Read by John Greenman. This is section 19 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Curtain Speech, opening of The Gilded Age, Park Theater, New York, September 16, 1874. Read by John Greenman. I thank you for the compliment of this call, and I will take advantage of it to say that I have written this piece in such a way that the jury can bring in a verdict of guilty or not guilty, just as they happen to feel about it. I have done this for this reason. If a play carries its best lesson by teaching what ought to be done in such a case, but is not done in real life, then the righteous verdict of guilty should appear. But if the best lesson may be conveyed by holding up the mirror and showing what is done every day in such a case, but ought not to be done, then the satirical verdict of not guilty should appear. I don't know which is best, strict truth and satire, or a nice moral lesson void of both. So I leave my jury free to decide. I am killing only one man in this tragedy now, and that is bad, for nothing helps out a play like bloodshed. But in a few days I propose to introduce the smallpox into the last act, and if that don't work, I shall close with a general massacre. I threw all my strength into the character of Colonel Sellers, hoping to make it a very strong tragedy part, and pathetic. I think this gentleman tries hard to play it right and make it majestic and pathetic, but his face is against him, and his clothes. I don't think anybody can make a tragedy effect in that kind of clothes. But I suppose he thinks they are impressive. He is from one of the Indian reservations. Oh, I can see that he tries hard to make it solemn and awful and heroic, but really sometimes he almost makes me laugh. I meant that turnip dinner to be pathetic, for how more forcibly could you represent poverty and misery and suffering than by such a dinner? And of course, if anything would bring tears to people's eyes, that would. But this man eats those turnips as if they were the bread of life, and so, of course, the pathos is knocked clear out of the thing. But I think he will learn. He has an absorbing ambition to become a very great tragedian. I hope you will overlook the faults in this play, because I have never written a play before, and if I am treated right, maybe I won't offend again. I wanted to have some fine situations and spectacular effects in this piece, but I was interfered with. I wanted to have a volcano in a state of eruption, with fire and smoke and earthquakes, and a great tossing river of blood-red lava flowing down the mountainside, and have the hero of this piece come booming down that red-hot river in a cast-iron canoe. But the manager wouldn't hear of it. He said there wasn't any volcano in Missouri. As if I am responsible for Missouri's poverty. And then he said that by the laws of nature
the hero would burn up. His cast-iron canoe wouldn't protect him. Very well, I said, put him in a patent fireproof safe and let him slide, all the more thrilling, and paint on it, "This safe is from Herring's establishment," same as you would on a piano, and you can pay the whole expense of the volcano just on the advertisement. But the manager objected, though he said heaps of pretty things, among others that I was an ass, and so I had to let the volcano go.
End of curtain speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 20 of Mark Twain speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Curtain speech, 100th performance of The Gilded Age, Park Theater, New York, December 23, 1874. Read by John Greenman.
I thank you for this call, for it gives me an opportunity to testify my appreciation of the vast compliment which the metropolis has paid to Mr. Raymond and me in approving of our efforts to the very substantial extent of filling this house for us 100 nights in succession. After such praise as this from the first city in the land, it would be useless for me to try to pretend that we are not feeling a good deal set up, so I shall not pretend anything of the kind. We feel a good deal vainer than anybody would want to confess. I learned through the newspapers that I was to make a speech here tonight, and so I went to work, as I always do, to try and do the very best I possibly could on this occasion. I was determined to do it. I went at it faithfully, but when I came to look critically into this matter, I found that I shouldered a pretty heavy contract. I found I shouldered a very heavy contract, because there is only one topic that is proper to be discussed on this platform at this time, and that is this play and these actors and all the success which this play has met. Very well, that is an excellent subject for somebody else. It is right for an outsider, or for somebody not connected with the concern, but for me, the dramatist, to praise these actors of mine, to praise this play of mine, and this success of ours, that would not come gracefully from me. There would be a little egotism in it. Neither can I criticize and abuse the actors, for I don't want to. I could abuse the play, but I have better judgment, and I cannot praise these actors of mine right here in their hearing and before their faces, for that would make anybody with flesh and blood unhappy, and indeed to praise them would be like praising the members of my own family and glorifying the lady who does our washing. And the more I think of this matter, the more I see the difficulty of the position, until I find myself in a condition I once before experienced. Times. Mr. Twain here recited from his published work, Roughing It, the sketch, A Genuine Mexican Plug. Through that adventure, through that misfortune, I lost the faculty of speech. For 24 hours I was absolutely speechless, and this is the second time that that has occurred.
End of curtain speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 21 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Introductory Remarks. Spelling Match. Asylum Hill Congregational Church, Hartford, May 12, 1875. Read by John Greenman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been honored with the office of introducing these approaching orthographical solemnities with a few remarks. The temperance crusade swept the land some time ago, that is, that vast portion of the land where it was needed, but it skipped Hartford. Now comes this new spelling epidemic, and this time we are stricken. So I suppose we needed the affliction. I don't say we needed it, for I don't see any use in spelling a word right, and never did. I mean, I don't see any use in having a uniform and arbitrary way of spelling words. We might as well make all clothes alike and cook all dishes alike. Sameness is tiresome. Variety is pleasing. I have a correspondent whose letters are always a refreshment to me. There is such a breezy, unfettered originality about his orthography. He always spells cow with a large K. Now that is just as good as to spell it with a small one. It is better. It gives the imagination a broader field, a wider scope. It suggests to the mind a grand, vague, impressive new kind of a cow. Superb effects can be produced by variegated spelling. Now, there is Blind Tom, the musical prodigy. He always spells a word according to the sound that is carried to his ear, and he is an enthusiast in orthography. When you give him a word, he shouts it out, puts all his soul into it. I once heard him called upon to spell orangutan before an audience. He said, "O, R-A-N-G, orang, G-E-R, ger, oranger, T-A-N-G, tang, oranger tang." Now a body can respect an orangutan that spells his name in a vigorous way like that, but the feeble dictionary makes a mere kitten of him. In the old times people spelled just as they pleased. That was the right idea. You had two chances at a stranger then. You knew a strong man from a weak one by his ironclad spelling, and his handwriting helped you to verify your verdict. Some people have an idea that correct spelling can be taught, and taught to anybody. That is a mistake. The spelling faculty is born in a man, like poetry, music, and art. It is a gift. It is a talent. People who have this gift in a high degree only need to see a word once in print, and it is forever photographed upon their memory. They cannot forget it. People who haven't it must be content to spell more or less like thunder, and expect to splinter the dictionary wherever their orthographical lightning happens to strike. There are 114,000 words in the unabridged dictionary. I know a lady who can spell only 180 of them right. She steers clear of all the rest. She can't learn any more. So her letters always consist of those constantly recurring 180 words. Now and then, when she finds herself obliged to write upon a subject which necessitates the use of some other words, she don't write on that subject. I have a relative in New York who is almost sublimely gifted. She can't spell any word right. There is a game called Verbarium. A dozen people are each provided with a sheet of paper, across the top of which is written a long word like kaleidoscopical, or something like that, and the game is to see who can make up the most words out of that in 3 minutes, always beginning with the initial letter of that word. Upon one occasion the word chosen was cofferdam. When time was called, everybody had built from 5 to 20 words, except this young lady. She only had one word, calf. We all studied a moment, and then said, "Why, there is no L in cofferdam." Then we examined her paper. To the eternal honor of that uninspired, unconscious, sublimely independent soul be it said, she had spelt the word calf. If anybody here can spell calf any more sensibly than that, let him step to the front and take his milk. 2 prizes are offered for this evening's contest, one for the speller that holds out longest, and one for the speller that falls first. The first prize is a choice between Guizot's History of France, 5 octavo volumes, illustrated by de Neuville, the London Art Journal for 1875, profusely illustrated with wood and steel, or a nosegay curiously painted upon a slate, which picture is burned into the slate, and the surface is afterward beautifully polished. This ingenious sort of art is the invention of a New England lady. You can see fine specimens of it at Mr. Glazier's. I have been instructed not to reveal just yet what the prize is which is to be given to that untrammeled spirit who shall succeed in sitting down first. The insurrection will now begin. End of introductory remarks, read by John Greenman. This is section 22 of Mark Twain speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Political speech. Republican mass meeting, Allen Hall, Hartford, September 30th, 1876. Read by John Greenman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel very greatly honored in being chosen to preside at this meeting. This employment is new to me. I never have taken any part in a political canvass before, except to vote. The tribe of which I am the humblest member, the literary tribe, is one which is not given to bothering about politics, but there are times when even the strangest departures are justified, and such a season, I take it, is the present canvass. Someone asked me the other day why it was that nearly all the people who write books and magazines had lately come to the front and proclaimed their political preference, since such a thing had probably never occurred before in America, and why it was that almost all of this strange new band of volunteers marched under the banner of Hayes and Wheeler. I think these people have come to the front mainly because they think they see at last a chance to make this government a good government, because they think they see a chance to institute an honest and sensible system of civil service which shall so amply prove its worth and worthiness that no succeeding president can ever venture to put his foot upon it. Our present civil system,
born of General Jackson and the Democratic Party, is so idiotic, so contemptible, so grotesque, that it would make the very savages of Dahomey jeer, and the very gods of solemnity laugh. We will not hire a blacksmith who never lifted a sledge. We will not hire a schoolteacher who does not know the alphabet. We will not have a man about us in our business life, in any walk of life, low or high, unless he has served an apprenticeship and can prove that he is capable of doing the work he offers to do. We even require a plumber to know something about his business, so that he shall at least know which side of a pipe is the inside. But when you come to our civil service, we serenely fill great numbers of our minor public offices with ignoramuses. We put the vast business of a custom house in the hands of a flathead who does not know a bill of lading from a transit of Venus, never having heard of either of them before. Under a Treasury appointment we pour oceans of money and accompanying statistics through the hands and brain of an ignorant villager who never before could wrestle with a 2 weeks' wash bill without getting thrown. Under our consular system we send creatures all over the world who speak no language but their own, and even when it comes to that, go wading all their days through the blood of murdered tenses and flourishing the scalps of mutilated parts of speech. When forced to it, we order home a foreign ambassador who is frescoed all over with indiscreetnesses, but we immediately send one in his place whose moral ceiling has a perceptible shady tint to it, and then he brays when we supposed he was going to roar. We carefully train and educate our naval officers and military men, and we ripen and perfect their capabilities through long service and experience, and keep hold of these excellent servants through a just system of promotion. This is exactly what we hope to do with our civil service under Mr. Hayes. We hope and expect to sever that service as utterly from politics as is the naval and military service, and we hope to make it as respectable, too. We hope to make worth and capacity the sole requirements of the civil service in the place of the amount of party dirty work the candidate has done. By the time General Hawley has finished his speech, I think you will know why we, in this matter, put our trust in Hayes in preference to any other man. I am not going to say anything about our candidates for state offices, because you know them, honor them, and will vote for them. But General Hawley being comparatively a stranger, I will say a single word in commendation of him, and it will furnish one of the many reasons why I am going to vote for him for Congress. I ask you to look seriously and thoughtfully at just one almost incredible fact. General Hawley, in his official capacity as President of the Centennial Commission, has done one thing which you may not have heard commented upon, and yet it is one of the most astounding performances of this decade, an act almost impossible, perhaps, to any other public officer in this nation. General Hawley has taken as high as $121,000 gate money at the Centennial in a single day, and never stole a cent of it. End of political speech read by John Greenman.
This is section 23 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Curtain Speech. Opening of Sin. Fifth Avenue Theater, New York, July 31st, 1877. Read by John Greenman.
Ladies and gentlemen, in view of this admirable success, it is meet that I try to express to you our hearty thanks for the large share which your encouraging applause has had in producing this success. This office I take upon me with great pleasure. This is a very remarkable play. You may not have noticed it, but I assure you that it is so. The construction of this play was a work of great labor and research and plagiarism. When the authors of this play began their work, they were resolved that it should not lack blood-curdling disasters, accidents, calamities, for these things always help out a play. But we wanted them to be new ones, brilliant, unhackneyed. In a lucky moment we hit upon the breaking down of a stage-coach as being something perfectly fresh and appalling. It seemed a stroke of genius, an inspiration. We were charmed with it, so we naturally overdid it a little. Consequently, when the play was first completed, we found we had had that stage breakdown 7 times in the first act. We saw that wouldn't do. The piece was going to be too stagey. I didn't notice that. That is very good. Yes, the critics and everybody would say this sort of thing argued poverty of invention, and confidentially it did resemble that, so of course we set to work and put some limitations upon that accident, and we threw a little variety into the general style of it, too. Originally the stage-coach always came in about every 7 minutes and broke down at the footlights and spilt the passengers down among the musicians. You can see how monotonous that was to the musicians. But we fixed all that. At present the stage-coach only breaks down once. A private carriage breaks down once, and the horses of another carriage run away once. We could have left out 1 or 2 of these, but then we had the horses and vehicles on our hands, and we couldn't afford to throw them away on a mere quibble. I am making this explanation in the hope that it will reconcile you to the repetition of that accident. This play is more didactic than otherwise. For the instruction of the young, we have introduced a game of poker in the first act. The game of poker is all too little understood in the higher circles of this country. Here and there you will find an ambassador that has some knowledge of the game, but you take the general average of the nation, and our ignorance ought to make us blush. Why, I have even known a clergyman, a liberal, cultivated, estimable, pure-hearted man, and a most excellent husband and father, who didn't value an ace full above 2 pair and a jack. Such ignorance as that is brutalizing. Whoever sees Mr. Parslow in this piece sees as good and natural and consistent a Chinaman as he could see in San Francisco. I think his portrayal of the character reaches perfection. The whole purpose of the piece is to afford an opportunity for the illustration of this character. The Chinaman is going to become a very frequent spectacle all over America by and by, and a difficult political problem, too. Therefore it seems well enough to let the public study him a little on the stage beforehand. The actors, The management and the authors have done their best to begin this course of public instruction effectively this evening. I will say only one more word about this remarkable play. It is this: when this play was originally completed it was so long and so wide and so deep in places, and so comprehensive that it would have taken 2 weeks to play it, and I thought this was a good feature. I supposed we could have a sign on the curtain to be continued and it would be all right, but the manager said no, that wouldn't do. To play a play 2 weeks long would be sure to get us in trouble with the government, because the Constitution of the United States says you shan't inflict cruel and inhuman punishments. So he set to work to cut it down and cart the refuse to the paper mill. Now that was a good thing. I never saw a play improve as this one did. The more he cut out of it, the better it got, right along. He cut out and cut out and cut out, and I do believe this would be one of the best plays in the world today if his strength had held out and he could have gone on and cut out the rest of it. With this brief but necessary explanation of the plot and purpose and moral of this excellent work, I make my bow, repeat my thanks, and remark that the scissors have been repaired and the work of improvement will go on. End of curtain speech, read by John Greenman.
This is section 24 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dinner Speech. Putnam Phalanx Dinner for the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts. Allen House, Hartford, October 2, 1877. Read by John Greenman.
I wouldn't have missed being here for a good deal. The last time I had the privilege of breaking bread with soldiers was some years ago, with the oldest military organization in England, the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of London, somewhere about its 600th anniversary, and now I have enjoyed this privilege with its oldest child, the oldest military organization in America, the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts, on this your 240th anniversary. Fine old stock, both of you, and if you fight as well as you feed, God protect the enemy. I did not assemble at the hotel parlors today to be received by a committee as a mere civilian guest. No, I assembled at the headquarters of the Putnam Phalanx, and insisted upon my right to be escorted to this place as one of the military guests, for I, too, am a soldier. I am inured to war. I have a military history. I have been through a stirring campaign, and there is not even a mention of it in any history of the United States or of the Southern Confederacy. To such lengths can the envy and the malignity of the historian go. I will unbosom myself here, where I cannot but find sympathy. I will tell you about it, and appeal through you to justice. In the earliest summer days of the war, I slipped out of Hannibal, Missouri, by night with a friend, and joined a detachment of the rebel General Tom Harris's army. I find myself in a great minority here. Up a gorge behind an old barn in Rawls County. Colonel Rawls, of Mexican War celebrity, swore us in. He made us swear to uphold the flag and Constitution of the United States, and to destroy every other military organization that we caught doing the same thing, which, being interpreted, means that we were to repel invasion. Well, you see, this mixed us. We couldn't really tell which side we were on, but we went into camp and left it to the God of battles. For that was the term then. I was made second lieutenant and chief mogul of a company of 11 men who knew nothing about war, nor anything, for we had no captain. My friend, who was 19 years old, 6 feet high, 3 feet wide, and some distance through, and just out of the infant school, was made orderly sergeant. His name was Ben Tupper. He had a hard time. When he was mounted and on the march, he used to go to sleep, and his horse would reach around and bite him on the leg, and then he would wake up and cry and curse and want to go home. The other men pestered him a good deal, too. When they were dismounted they said they couldn't march in double file with him because his feet took up so much room. One night, when we were around the campfire, some fellow on the outside in the cold said, "Ben Tupper, put down that newspaper. It throws the whole place into twilight, and casts a shadow like a blanket." Ben said, "I ain't got any newspaper." Then the other fellow said, "Oh, I see. 'Twas your ear." We all slept in a corn crib, on the corn, and the rats were very thick. Ben Tupper had been carefully and rightly reared, and when he was ready for bed he would start to pray, and a rat would bite him on the heel, and then he would sit up and swear all night and keep everybody awake. He was town-bred, and did not seem to have any correct idea of military discipline. If I commanded him to shut up, he would say, "Who was your nigger last year?" One evening I ordered him to ride out about 3 miles on picket duty, to the beginning of a prairie. Said he, "What, in the night? And them blamed Union soldiers like to be prowling around there any time?" So he wouldn't go. And the next morning I ordered him again. Said he, "In the rain? I think I see myself." He didn't go. Next day I ordered him on picket duty once more. This time he looked hurt. Said he, "What, on Sunday? You must be a damn fool." Well, picketing might have been a very good thing, but I saw it was impracticable. So I dropped it from my military system. We had a good enough time there at that barn, barring the rats and the mosquitoes and the rain. We levied on both parties impartially, and both parties hated us impartially. But one day we heard that the invader was approaching, so we had to pack up and move, of course. And within 24 hours he was coming again, so we moved again. Next day he was after us once more. Well, we didn't like it much, but we moved, rather than make trouble. This went on for a week or 10 days more, and we saw considerable scenery. Then Ben Tupper lost patience. Said he, "War ain't what it's cracked up to be. I'm going home if I can't ever get a chance to sit down a minute. Why do these people keep us a-humping around so? Blame their skins, do they think this is an excursion?" Some of the other town boys got to grumbling. They complained that there was an insufficiency of umbrellas. So I sent around to the farmers and borrowed what I could. Then they complained that the Worcestershire sauce was out. There was mutiny and dissatisfaction all around, and of course here came the enemy pestering us again, as much as 2 hours before breakfast, too, when nobody wanted to turn out, of course. This was a little too much. The whole command felt insulted. I detached one of my aides and sent him to the brigadier and asked him to assign us a district where there wasn't so much bother going on. The history of our campaign was laid before him, but instead of being touched by it, what did he do? He sent back an indignant message and said, "You have had a dozen chances inside of 2 weeks to capture the enemy, and he is still at large." Well, we knew that. Feeling bad? Stay where you are this time, or I will court-martial and hang the whole lot of you. Well, I submitted this brutal message to my battalion and asked their advice. Said the orderly sergeant, "If Tom Harris wants the enemy, let him come and get him. I ain't got any use for my share. And who's Tom Harris, anyway, I'd like to know, that's putting on so many frills? Why, I knew him when he wasn't nothing but a darn telegraph operator. Gentlemen, you can do as you choose. As for me, I've got enough of this sashaying around so's you can't get a chance to pray, because the time's all required for cussing. So off goes my war paint. You hear me?" The whole regiment said with one voice, "That's the talk for me." So there and then, on the spot, my brigade disbanded itself and tramped off home with me at the tail of it. I hung up my own sword and returned to the arts of peace, and there were people who said I hadn't been absent from them yet. We were the first men that went into the service in Missouri. We were the first that went out of it anywhere. This, gentlemen, is the history of the part which my division took in the Great Rebellion, and such is the military record of its commander-in-chief, and this is the first time that the deeds of those warriors have been brought officially to the notice of mankind. Treasure these things in your hearts, and so shall the detected and truculent historians of this land be brought to shame and confusion. I ask you to fill your glasses and drink with me to the reverent memory of the orderly sergeant and those other neglected and forgotten heroes, my footsore and travel-stained paladins, who were first in war, first in peace, and were not idle during the interval that lay between.
End of dinner speech read by John Greenman. This is section 25 of Mark Twain speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dinner speech. Farewell banquet for Bayard Taylor, Delmonico's, New York, April 4th, 1878. Read by John Greenman.
Mr. Chairman, I had intended to make an address of some length here tonight, and in fact wrote out an impromptu speech, but have had no time to memorize it. I cannot make a speech on the moment, and therefore, being unprepared, I am silent and undone. However, I will say this much for the speech that I had written out, that it was a very good one, and I gave it away as I had no further use for it, and saw that I could not deliver it. Therefore I will ask the indulgence of the company here to let me retire without speaking. I will make my compliments to our honored friend Mr. Taylor, but I will make them on board ship, where I shall be a fellow passenger.
The following is the speech Mark Twain had prepared.
I have been warned, as no doubt have all among you that are inexperienced, that a dinner to our ambassador is an occasion which demands, and even requires, a peculiar caution and delicacy in the handling of the dangerous weapon of speech. I have been warned to avoid all mention of international politics and all criticisms, however mild, of countries with which we are at peace, lest such utterances embarrass our minister and our government in their dealings with foreign states. In a word, I have been cautioned to talk, but be careful not to say anything. I do not consider this a difficult task. Now, it has often occurred to me that the conditions under which we live at the present day, with the revelations of geology all about us, viewing, upon the one hand, the majestic configurations of the Silurian, Olithic, Old Red Sandstone periods, and, upon the other, the affiliations and stratifications and ramifications of the prehistoric, post-Pliocene, ante-penultimate epochs, we are stricken dumb with amazed surprise, and can only lift up our hands and say with that wise but odious Frenchman, "It was a slip of the tongue, sir, and wholly unintentional, entirely unintentional." It would ill become me, upon an occasion like this, purposely to speak slightingly of a citizen of a country with whom we are at peace, and especially great and gracious France, whom God preserve. The subject, however, is a delicate one, and I will not pursue it. But, as I was about to remark, cast your eye abroad, sir, for one pregnant moment, over the vista which looms before you in the mighty domain of intellectual progression, and contemplate the awe-compelling theory of the descent of man. Development, sir, development, natural selection, correlation of the sexes, spontaneous combustion. What gulfs and whirlwinds of intellectual stimulus these magic words fling upon the burning canvas of the material universe of soul! Across the chasm of the ages we take the oyster by the hand and call him brother, and back and still further back we go, and breathe the germ we cannot see, and know in him our truer Adam. And as we stand, dazed, transfixed, exalted, and gaze down the long procession of life, marking how steadily, how symmetrically we have ascended, step by step, to our sublime estate and dignity of humanity, out of one lowly form into a little higher and a little higher forms, adding grace after every change, developing from tadpoles into frogs, frogs into fishes, fishes into birds, birds into reptiles, reptiles into Russians. I beg a million pardons, sir and gentlemen, it was a wholly innocent slip of the tongue, and due only to the excitement of debate, for far be it from me on such an occasion as this to cast a seeming slur upon a great nation with which we are at peace, a great and noble and Christian nation, whom God expand. But, as I was about to remark, I maintain, and nothing can ever drive me from that position, that the contributions of the 19th century to science and the industrial arts are, but of course they are, There is no need to dwell upon that. You look at it yourself. Look at steam. Look at the steamboat. Look at the railway. Look at the steamship. Look at the telegraph, which enables you to flash your thoughts from world to world, ignoring intervening seas. Look at the telephone, which enables you to speak into affection's remote ear the word that cheers, and into the ear of the foe the opinion which you ought not to risk at shorter range. Look at the sewing machine. Look at the fog horn. Look at the bell punch. Look at the book agent. And, more than all, 1,000 times, look at the last and greatest, the aerophone, which will enable Moody and Sankey to stand on the tallest summit of the Rocky Mountains and deliver their message to listening America. And necessarily it will annul and do away with the pernicious custom of taking up a collection. Look at all these things, sir, and say if it is not a far prouder and more precious boon to have been born in the 19th century than in any century that went before it. Ah, sir, clothed with the all-sufficient grandeur of citizenship in the 19th century, even the wild and arid New Jersey man might— a mistake, sir, a mistake, and entirely unintentional. Of all the kingdoms, principalities, and countries with which it is our privilege to hold peaceful relations, I regard New Jersey as dearest to our admiration, nearest to our heart, the wisest and the purest among the nations. I retire the undiplomatic language and beg your sympathy and indulgence. But as I was about to remark, it has always seemed to me, that is, of course, since I reached a reasoning age, that this much agitated question of future rewards and punishments was one upon which honest and sincere differences of opinion might exist. One individual, with more or less justice, leaning to the radical side of it, whilst another individual, with apparently equal justice, but with infinitely more common sense, more intelligence, more justification, leads to a bitter and remorseless detestation of the pitiless prince of perdition. A slip of the tongue, I do sincerely assure you. I beg you to let me withdraw that unintentional slur upon the character of that great and excellent personage with whom and whose country we are upon the closest and warmest terms, and who— it is no use, sir, I will sit down. I don't seem to have any knack at a diplomatic speech. I have probably compromised the country enough for the present. Nonsense aside, sir, I am most sincerely glad to assist at this public expression of appreciation of Mr. Taylor's character, scholarship, and distinguished literary service. I am sure he was not merely one of the fittest men we had for the place, but the fittest. In so honoring him, our country has conspicuously honored herself. End of dinner speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 26 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dinner Speech, Anglo-American Club Banquet, Heidelberg, Germany, July 4th, 1878. Read by John Greenman. Gentlemen, since I arrived a month ago in this old wonderland, this vast garden of Germany, my English tongue has so often proved a useless piece of baggage to me, and so troublesome to carry around in a country where they haven't the checking system for luggage, that I finally set to work last week and learned the German language. Also, es freut mich, dass dies so ist, denn es muss in ein hauptfachlich Degree hauflich sein, dass man auf an occasion like this sin Red in die Sprache des Landes, worin he boards, aussprechen soll. Dafür habe ich aus rheinischer Vergangenheit, Hauptpflichkeit, aus rheinischer Hauptpflichkeit habe ich resolved to tackle this business in the German language, Gottes Willen. Also, Sie müssen so freundlich sein und verzeiht mich die Interlarding von ein oder zwei englischer Worte hier und da, denn ich finde dass die Deutsche is not a very copious language, and so when you've really got anything to say, you've got to draw on a language that can stand the strain. Wenn aber man kann nicht meinen Rede verstehen, so werde ich ihm später das Bild übersetzen, wenn solche Dienste verlangen wollen haben werden sollen sein hatte. I don't know what wollen haben werden sollen sein hatte means, but I notice they always put it at the end of a German sentence, merely for general literary gorgeousness, I suppose. This is a great and justly honored day, a day which is worthy of the veneration in which it is held by the true patriots of all climes and nationalities, a day which offers a fruitful theme for thought and speech. Und meinen Freunde, no, meinen Freunden, meines Freundes, well, take your choice. They're all the same price. I don't know which one is right. Also, ich habe gehabt worden gewesen sein, as Goethe says in his Paradise Lost. That is to say, but let us change cars. Also, die Anblick so viele großbritannischer und amerikanischer hier zusammengetroffen in brüderlich Concord ist zwar a welcome and inspiriting spectacle. And what has moved you to it? Can the terse German tongue rise to the expression of this impulse? Is it Freundschaftsbezeigungsgegenstand verordneten Versandungen Familieneigentümlichkeiten? Nein. Oh, nein. This is a crisp and noble word, but it fails to pierce the marrow of the impulse which has gathered this friendly meeting and produced dieser Anblick, ein Anblick, welcher ist gut zu sehen, gut für die Augen in a foreign land and a far country, eine Anblick solcher als in die gewöhnliche Heidelberger Phrase nennt man ein schönes Aussicht. Ja, freilich, natürlich, wahrscheinlich ebenso wohl. Also, die Aussicht auf dem Königsstuhl mehr größerer ist, aber Gästliche sprechen nicht so schön, lob Gott, because sie sind hier zusammengetroffen in bräulichen Concord, ein großer Tag zu feiern, whose high benefits were not for one land and one locality only, but have conferred a measure of good upon all lands that know liberty today and love it. 100 Jahre vorüber, waren die Engländer und die Amerikaner Feinde, aber heute sind sie herrlichen Freunde, Gott sei Dank. May this good fellowship endure. May these banners here blended in amity so remain. May they never any more wave over opposing hosts, or be stained with blood which was kindred, is kindred, and always will be kindred, until a line drawn upon a map shall be able to say, "This bars the ancestral blood from flowing in the veins of the descendant."
End of dinner speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 27 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dinner speech, Stanley Club, Paris, circa April 1879. Read by John Greenman.
Mr. Ryan said to me just now that I'd got to make a speech. I said to Mr. Ryan, "The news came too late to save Roger McPherson." It is sad to know that some things always come too late, and when I look around upon this brilliant assembly I feel disappointed to think what a nice speech I might have made, what fine topics I might have found in Paris to speak about among these historic monuments. The architecture of Paris, the towers of Notre Dame, the caves, and other ancient things. Then I might have said something about the objects of which Paris folks are fond: literature, art, medicine, and adultery. But the news came too late to save Roger McPherson. Perhaps you are not as well acquainted with McPherson as I am. Well, I'll explain who McPherson was. When we sailed from New York there came on board a man all haggard, a mere skeleton. He wasn't much of a man, he wasn't, and on the voyage we often heard him say to himself, "The news came too late to save Roger McPherson." I got interested, and I wanted to know about the man, so I asked him who was McPherson, and he said, "I'm McPherson, but the news came too late to save Roger McPherson." "How too late?" I asked. "About 3 weeks too late," he replied. I'll tell you how it happened. A friend of mine died, and they told me I must take his body on the cars to his parents in Illinois. I said I'd do it, and they gave me a card with the address and told me to go down to the depot and put it on a box I'd find there, have the box put on the baggage car, and go right along with it to Illinois. I found the box all right, and nailed the card on it, and put it on the cars. Then I went in the depot and got a sandwich. I was walking around eating my sandwich, and I passed by the baggage room, and there was my box, with a young man walking around looking at it, and he had a card in his hand. I felt like going up to that young man and saying, "Stranger, that's my corpse," but I didn't. I walked on, ate my sandwich, and when I looked in again, the young man was gone, but there was that card nailed right on that box. I went and looked on that card. It was directed to Colonel Jenkins, Cleveland, Ohio. So I looked in the car, and there was my box all right. Just before the train started, a man came into the baggage car and laid a lot of Limburger cheese down on my box. He didn't know what was in my box, you know, and I didn't know what was in his paper. But I found out later. It was an awful cold night, and after we started the baggage master came in. He was a nice fellow, Johnson was, and he said, "A man would freeze to death out there. I'll make it all right." So he shut all the doors and all the windows, built a roaring coal fire in the stove, then he took turns fixing the car and poking the fire, till I began to smell something and feel uncomfortable, so I moved as far away from my corpse as I could, and Johnson says to me, "A friend of yours? Did he die lately? This year, I mean?" Says I, "I'll fix it." So I opened a window, and we took turns breathing the fresh air. After a while Johnson said, "Let's smoke. I think that'll fix it." So we lit our cigars and puffed a bit, but we got so sick that we let 'em go out again, and it didn't do any good. We tried the air again. Says Johnson, "He's in no trance, is he? There's doubt about some people being dead, but there's no doubt about him, is there? What did he die of?" We stopped at a station, and when we started off again, Johnson came in with a bottle of disinfector and says, "I've got something now that'll fix it." So he sprinkled it all around, over the box, the Limburger, and over everything, but it wouldn't do. The smells didn't mix well. Johnson said, "Just think of it. We've all got to die, all got to come to this." Then we thought we'd move the box to one end of the car, so we stooped over it. I took one end and he took the other, but we couldn't get it far. Johnson says, "We'll freeze to death if we stay out on the platform. We'll die if we stay in here." So we took hold of it again, but Johnson, he couldn't stand it. He fell right over. I dragged him out on the platform, and the cold air soon brought him to, and we went in the car to get warm. "What are we going to do?" asked Johnson, and he looked ill. "We are sure to have typhoid fever and half a dozen other fevers. We're poisoned, we are." At last we thought it was better to go out on the platform. In an hour and a half I was taken off that platform stiff, nearly frozen to death. They put me to bed, and I had all them fevers that Johnson spoke about. You see, the thing worked on my mind. It didn't do me no good to learn 3 weeks later that there had been a mistake, that my corpse had gone to Colonel Jenkins, Cleveland, and that I'd taken his box of rifles for decent burial to Illinois. The news came too late to save Roger McPherson, about 3 weeks too late. When I'm not prepared to speak, I always apologize, and that's the reason I've told you so much about Roger McPherson.
End of dinner speech read by John Greenman. This is section 28 of Mark Twain's Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Some Thoughts on the Science of Onanism. Stomach Club Dinner, Paris, Spring 1879. Read by John Greenman.
My gifted predecessor has warned you against the social evil, adultery. In his able paper he exhausted that subject. He left absolutely nothing more to be said on it. But I will continue his good work in the cause of morality by cautioning you against that species of recreation called self-abuse, to which I perceive that you are too much addicted. All great writers upon health and morals, both ancient and modern, have struggled with this stately subject. This shows its dignity and importance. Some of these writers have taken one side, some the other. Homer, in the second book of the Iliad, says with fine enthusiasm, Give me masturbation or give me death. Caesar, in his commentary, says, "To the lonely it is company, to the forsaken it is a friend, to the aged and impotent it is a benefactor. They that be penniless are yet rich, in that they still have this majestic diversion." In another place this excellent observer has said, "There are times when I prefer it to sodomy." Robinson Crusoe says, "I cannot describe what I owe to this gentle art." Queen Elizabeth said, "It is the bulwark of virginity." Cetwayo, the Zulu hero, remarked that "a jerk in the hand is worth two in the bush." The immortal Franklin has said, "Masturbation is the mother of invention." He also said, "Masturbation is the best policy." Michelangelo and all the other old masters I will remark, is an abbreviation, a contraction, have used similar language. Michelangelo said to Pope Julius II, "Self-negation is noble, self-culture is beneficent, self-possession is manly, but to the truly great and inspiring soul they are poor and tame compared to self-abuse." Mr. Brown here, in one of his latest and most graceful poems, refers to it in an eloquent line which is destined to live to the end of time: "None know it but to love it, none name it but to praise." Such are the utterances of the most illustrious of the masters of this renowned science, and apologists for it. The name of those who decry it and oppose it is legion. They have made strong arguments and uttered bitter speeches against it, but there is not room to repeat them here in much detail. Brigham Young, an expert of incontestable authority, said, "As compared with the other thing, it is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." Solomon said, "There is nothing to recommend it but its cheapness." Galen said, "It is shameful to degrade to such bestial use that grand limb, that formidable member, which we votaries of science dub the major maxillary, when they dub it at all, which is seldom. It would be better to decapitate the major than to use him so. It would be better to amputate the os frontis than to put it to such a use." The great statistician Smith, in his report to Parliament, says, "In my opinion, more children have been wasted in this way than in any other." It cannot be denied that the high authority of this art entitles it to our respect, but at the same time I think that its harmfulness demands our condemnation. Mr. Darwin was grieved to feel obliged to give up his theory that the monkey was the connecting link between man and the lower animals. I think he was too hasty. The monkey is the only animal, except man, that practices this science. Hence he is our brother. There is a bond of sympathy and relationship between us. Give this ingenious animal an audience of the proper kind, and he will straightway put aside his other affairs and take a whet. And you will see by the contortions and his ecstatic expression that he takes an intelligent and human interest in his performance. The signs of excessive indulgence in this destructive pastime are easily detectable. They are these: a disposition to eat, to drink, to smoke, to meet together convivially, to laugh, to joke, and tell indelicate stories, and mainly a yearning to paint pictures. The results of the habit are loss of memory, loss of virility, loss of cheerfulness, loss of hopefulness, loss of character, and loss of progeny. Of all the various kinds of sexual intercourse, this has least to recommend it. As an amusement, it is too fleeting. As an occupation, it is too wearing. As a public exhibition, there is no money in it. It is unsuited to the drawing-room, and in the most cultured society it has long since been banished from the social board. It has at last, in our day of progress and improvement, been degraded to brotherhood with flatulence. Among the best bred these two arts are now indulged only in private. Though by consent of the whole company, when only males are present, it is still permissible in good society to remove the embargo upon the fundamental sigh. My illustrious predecessor has taught you that all forms of the social evil are bad. I would teach you that some of those forms are more to be avoided than others. So, in concluding, I say, if you must gamble away your lives sexually, don't play a lone hand too much. When you feel a revolutionary uprising in your system, get your Vendome column down some other way. Don't jerk it down. End of Some Thoughts on the Science of Onanism, read by John Greenman. This is section 29 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Introducing General Hawley. Republican Meeting, Elmira, New York, October 16, 1879. Read by John Greenman. I see I am advertised to introduce the speaker of the evening. General Hawley of Connecticut and I see it is the report that I am to make a political speech. Now, I must say, this is an error. I wasn't constructed to make stump speeches, and on that head, politics, I have only this to say. First, see that you vote. Second, see that your neighbor votes. Lastly, see that yourself or neighbor don't scratch the ticket. General Hawley was president of the Centennial Commission. He was a gallant soldier in the war. He has been governor of Connecticut, member of Congress, and was president of the convention that nominated Abraham Lincoln. General Hawley: that nominated Grant. He says it was Grant, but I know better. He is a member of my church at Hartford, and the author of Beautiful Snow. Maybe he will deny that. It is not my province to enlarge upon matters generally. I am here simply to give him a character from his last place. As a fellow townsman and dutiful citizen, I have a high respect for him. As a personal friend of years, I have the warmest regard for him. As a neighbor whose vegetable garden adjoins my own, why, I watch him. But that is nothing. We all do that with any neighbor. General Hawley is a man who keeps his promises. He is a man who always speaks the truth, and not only in private life but in politics. He is an editor who believes what he says in his own newspaper. As author of Beautiful Snow, he has given us a poem which has added a new pang to winter. The public honor, public money, church property, anything and all things that are strictly public, are safe in his hands. I have watched him many a time as the contribution box went by, and I never saw him take anything out of it. Would that we had more such men in politics. Charity, compassion, benevolence are inborn in General Hawley. He never sends a tramp empty-handed from his door, but always gives him a letter of introduction to me. But above all and beyond all, it can be said with entire sincerity that he is a square, honest man. A square, honest man in politics. Think of that. And I will remark here, in confidence, that he occupies an almighty lonesome position. General Hawley's public aspect is as creditable as his private one. As a member of Congress, he has upheld our excellent President's hands. His voice and his vote have always been for the best good of his country. Considerations of self have never influenced his policy. He has never backed down before a responsibility, nor dodged one. As a citizen of the Republic, he is without reproach. In his faith in her institutions, in his pride in her greatness, in his affection for her and belief in her high destiny, he is an American of the Americans. As President of the Centennial Commission, he carried through and brought to a successful issue an enterprise which has borne the fame of our resources and industries to distant regions, and made our country a respected competitor in markets where her rivalry was of little moment before. As governor of his state, he governed well and righteously. As a soldier, he earned lasting praise and honor. His public trusts have been many, and never in the slightest did he prove unfaithful. Pure, honest, incorruptible, that is Joe Hawley. Such a man in politics is like a vase of attar of roses in a glue factory. It may modify the stench if it doesn't destroy it. And now, in speaking thus highly of the speaker of the evening, I have not meant to flatter, but only to speak the plain and simple truth. I haven't said anything more of him than I would say of myself. Ladies and gentlemen, this is General Hawley.
End of Introducing General Hawley, read by John Greenman. This is section 30 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Impromptu Speech, 13th Reunion, Army of the Tennessee, Haverly's Theater, Chicago, November 12, 1879. Read by John Greenman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just within a moment heard General Sherman say to a gentleman sitting in my neighborhood that if he would promise not to speak more than 2 minutes, he would let him get up. He didn't say that to me, and I judge by his remarks to me that he wouldn't allow me quite so much. But is that loud enough? I have not listened to a bad speech tonight. and I don't propose to be the one to furnish you with one, and I would, if I had time and permission, go on and make an excellent speech. But I never was happy, never could make a good impromptu speech without several hours to prepare it.
End of impromptu speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 31 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Speech. Atlantic Monthly Breakfast, 70th birthday of Oliver Wendell Holmes, Boston, December 3, 1879. Read by John Greenman.
I would have traveled a much greater distance than I have come to witness the paying of honors to Dr. Holmes, for my feeling toward him has always been one of peculiar warmth. When one receives a letter from a great man for the first time in his life, it is a large event to him, as all of you know by your own experience. You never can receive letters enough from famous men afterward to obliterate that one, or dim the memory of the pleasant surprise it was, and the gratification it gave you. Lapse of time cannot make it commonplace or cheap. Well, the first great man who ever wrote me a letter was our guest, Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was also the first great literary man I ever stole anything from, and that is how I came to write to him, and he to me. When my first book was new, a friend of mine said to me, "The dedication is very neat." Yes, I said, I thought it was. My friend said, "I always admired it, even before I saw it in The Innocents Abroad." I naturally said, "What do you mean? Where did you ever see it before?" "Well, I saw it first some years ago as Dr. Holmes' dedication to his Songs in Many Keys." Of course, my first impulse was to prepare this man's remains for burial, but, upon reflection, I said I would reprieve him for a moment or two, and give him a chance to prove his assertion if he could. We stepped into a bookstore, and he did prove it. I had really stolen that dedication, almost word for word. I could not imagine how this curious thing had happened, for I knew one thing, that a certain amount of pride always goes along with a teaspoonful of brains, and that this pride protects a man from deliberately stealing other people's ideas. That is what a teaspoonful of brains will do for a man, and admirers had often told me that I had nearly a basketful, though they were rather reserved as to the size of the basket. However, I thought the thing out, and solved the mystery. 2 years before, I had been laid up a couple of weeks in the Sandwich Islands, and had read and reread Dr. Holmes' poems till my mental reservoir was filled up with them to the brim. The dedication lay on the top, and handy, so, by and by, I unconsciously stole it. Perhaps I unconsciously stole the rest of the volume, too, for many people have told me that my book was pretty poetical in one way or another. Well, of course, I wrote Dr. Holmes and told him I hadn't meant to steal, and he wrote back and said, in the kindest way, that it was all right and no harm done, and added that he believed we all unconsciously worked over ideas gathered in reading and hearing, imagining they were original with ourselves. He stated a truth, and did it in such a pleasant way, and salved over my sore spot so gently and so healingly, that I was rather glad I had committed the crime for the sake of the letter. I afterward called on him and told him to make perfectly free with any ideas of mine that struck him as being good protoplasm for poetry. He could see by that there wasn't anything mean about me, and we got along right from the start. I have met Dr. Holmes many times since, and lately he said, "However, I am wandering wildly away from the one thing which I got on my feet to do, that is, to make my compliments to you, my fellow teachers of the great public, and likewise to say that I am right glad to see that Dr. Holmes is still in his prime and full of generous life, and as age is not determined by years, but by trouble and infirmities of mind and body, I hope it may be a very long time yet before anyone can truthfully say he is growing old." End of speech, read by John Greenman. This is section 32 of Mark Twain Speaking. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Welcome to General Grant. Hartford, October 16, 1880. Read by John Greenman. General Grant, I also am deputized to welcome you to the sincere and cordial hospitalities of Hartford, the city of the historic and revered Charter Oak, of which the most of this town is built. At first it was proposed to have only one speaker to welcome you, but this was changed because it was feared that, considering the shortness of the crop of speeches this year, if anything occurred to prevent that speaker from delivering his speech, you would feel disappointed. By your example you have killed the hoary fashion of long speeches, and for this you deserve imperishable gratitude. We shall best honor you in honoring the lesson you have taught. As a soldier you proved yourself without a peer, and so we welcome you as the first soldier of the Republic. As President, you inaugurated international arbitration, and so we welcome you as the first to lay the axe to the root of the trade of war, and as the pioneer in the march of the nations toward the last perfection of enlightened government, the substitution of reason for force in the settlement of controversies, and finally as one who, being almost called, and yet not quite, to carry the standard of a great party for the third time in a presidential campaign, has sunk the hero in the patriot, has cast aside all considerations of self, all pique, all narrow feeling, and has devoted his whole heart and the might of his great name to the cause of that party, and through it to the highest and best interest of the country, its progress, and its civilization, we welcome you by the noblest of all the titles you have earned, that of First Citizen of the Republic. I desire at this point to refer to your past history. By years of colossal labor and colossal achievement, you at last beat down a gigantic rebellion and saved your country from destruction. Then the country commanded you to take the helm of state. You preferred your great office of General of the Armies, and the rest and comfort which it afforded, but you loyally obeyed, and relinquished permanently the ample and well-earned salary of the generalship, and resigned your accumulating years to the chance mercies of a precarious existence. By this present fatiguing progress through the land, by the sight of your honored face, by the wisdom of your words, and by the magic of your name, you are contributing a share whose magnitude cannot be overestimated toward saving your country once more, this time from dishonor and shame, and from industrial disaster. You are now a private citizen, but private employments are closed against you because your name would be used for speculative purposes, and you have refused to permit that. But your country will reward you, never fear. When Wellington won Waterloo, a battle about on a level with some dozen of your victories, sordid England tried to pay him for that service with wealth and grandeur. She made him a duke, loaded him with minor and yet great and shining dignities, and gave him a sum of money equivalent, at present values, to $4,000,000. If you had done and suffered for any other country what you have done and suffered for your own, you would have been affronted in the same sordid way. But thank God this vast and rich and mighty republic is imbued to the core with a delicacy which will forever preserve her from so degrading a deserving man. Your country loves you, your country is proud of you, your country is grateful to you. Her praises, which have been ringing in your ears all these weeks and months, will never cease while the flag you saved continues to wave. Your country stands ready from this day forth to testify her measureless love and pride and gratitude toward you in every conceivable, inexpensive way. Welcome to Hartford, great soldier, honored statesman, unselfish citizen. End of Welcome to General Grant, read by John Greenman.